Sandy, thank you so much for having me, and a big congratulations to the Center for Social Impact, because it's really, really fantastic event. Really impressed, very impressed. So 10 minutes, and Sandy made sure that we had no PowerPoints, so which is good, which it actually will make me think what I'm talking about. If you look at this space in any sort of academic literature, it always says, and given when I was teaching at the university, we would always say this is a nexus of civil society, the private sector and public sector coming together. So you almost, we all would show it in a Venn diagram, right? So the three circles. And where the three circles meet, that little area is basically known as the social enterprise zone, meaning these are the three circles that's coming together for this space to grow. The interesting thing is, in Asia, this whole space is growing without one of the circles there, which is actually the public sector. So we have managed to grow the space exponentially in Asia with just the civil society, and it's a very broad definition of civil society, and the private sector coming together. And I think that in itself is making this space grow very differently from how it is growing in the developed markets, like in Australia, like in the UK, or in the US. Because the good news is the G8 is really interested in this space now. I always say the bad news is the G8 is interested in this space now. So I think in some ways, for us in Asia, I guess the comparison is we are sort of kids who are growing up in an orphanage without the parents, which is great. So we actually can do what we want to do and how we want to grow the space. Of course, the flip side is anything we do, we actually have to be very smart about it, find our own funding, and be really creative in terms of making revenue streams. Because trust me, growing this space, no one wants to just write you a check. So it has been, so just setting that stage, you can imagine the work that we're doing now really has been something that had to be very much part of the definition of how the private sector accepted this space. So in terms of, I was having some conversation last night, this wonderful dinner that Sandy and her team pulled together, and I think what was resonating with me is the fact that here in Australia, you have to almost make a case for the space to the private sector. I think for us, we use the language of private sector, and that has really made this whole space grow faster and also, I guess make it seem much more plausible and accepted by the private sector. Now, why is the private sector so important? Well, it is important because they're sitting on the capital. And this entire space is grown on the whole notion that you are bringing private sector capital for social good, right? And that's how we are sort of setting it up, that private sector capital used for social development and how that can be done. So what I have worked on for the last few years, and we have developed, which is two companies. One is Impact Investment Exchange, which in short now, it's so mouthful, we call it IIX. And IIX has developed over the course of last 4 years, 3 investment platforms. So we have an incubator, which basically works with social enterprises which are raising up to, say, $200,000. We have that incubator set up with a Silicon Valley Venture Fund. So they are the ones who come in as the first investors, and then the other people can follow. And that has been very good for us because the Silicon Valley Venture Fund, they have played a big role in sort of bringing in their expertise on the technology side and really saying, okay, how do we grow the space in the incubation level? Then we have which is currently the largest platform, which is Impact Partners, and that is a private placement platform. Now, what is a private placement platform? Private placement platform is, frankly, what Sandy and her team has created outside, which is this whole social marketplace, where you can actually invest, but you can't trade, okay? So the private placement platform, it's okay, I'll pick it up. The private placement platform is, it is based in Singapore, but it's the largest now in the world for this space. So we have about 300 investors. And on this platform, the investors have to be accredited investors. And accredited investors, the definition of that usually in Singapore and also in the US is someone who has a net worth of over $2 million. So we have high net worth individuals, we have ultra high net worth individuals, a term that I learned after moving to Singapore. I always say I'm from a country of ultra poor, so I guess they're ultra rich in this world as well. And then we also have family offices, and then we have some social venture funds. So it kind of runs the gamut. But the largest number of investors on that platform are basically high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. So that platform for us has been really, I would say in a lot of ways, the petri dish of seeing how these investments happen. And what Sandy was saying when Sandy was there for our conference, it is true, and everyone always comments that in our conferences we have many more investors than social enterprises, and we actually focus on that because we are trying to make everyone an investor and bring in as much as we can. Now, the reality is the private placement, it's working well for us now. We have raised over $10 million, and we always also look at the impact of the lives. It's about 8 million lives in energy, education, water, kind of across from India to the Philippines. But really the holy grail is how do we unlock more capital into the space? Yes, I mean, next year we're looking at doubling that on the private placement, about $20 million in investment. But the reality is how do we get into that hundreds of millions? And that's where the exchange comes in. So it took us 4 years to create this exchange. We know every regulation possible on how to create an exchange. It was a painful process, but we managed to do it. And we actually established the exchange in Mauritius. So we have created this exchange with the Stock Exchange of Mauritius. And it is a full-fledged exchange where trading can happen for securities which are giving triple bottom line. We have a separate board there for Impact Exchange, and which actually, basically monitors the social side. And then, of course, we have the Stock Exchange of Mauritius, which also looks at the financial side. The reason we could do it in Mauritius is because the cost of listing on an exchange is very expensive. Any exchange, its average is about 19% of the capital raise. We managed to bring that cost down to about 3%. So there had to be a lot of regulations that we had to work with, and in this case, I would say this is the only time where the government played a big role, the Mauritius government, in embracing that and making that happen, because obviously when it's regulations, you have to work with the government. So the exchange is up and running, and we are now working on several issuances, and which are in about $30–40 million each. And the nice thing is, when those issuances are going to be up in the next few months, any one of us in this room can be an investor. So we really are talking about, for the first time ever, giving the power of investment to the retail. It's no longer you have to buy a share in a mutual fund and the mutual fund does something about it, but you can actually do it yourself if you have a brokerage account. So it's something that we are very excited about. Now, in the process as well, for us to sort of do this entire spectrum of capital raise from incubation, looking at private placement, which is up to about 3 million, and then doing the exchange, there's actually a lot of hand-holding and advisory work that we have to do as well. So IX has a lot of bankers, former investment bankers, who spend their time actually structuring, very interesting mechanisms and the way the investments can happen. So that shows the reality is for capital to come in a regulated way, investment way into the space, you actually have to do quite a bit of work around it to get it there. And obviously, the good news is it is possible. Now, on Shujog's side, which is the other company that I started, which is a not-for-profit, the main focus of Shujog has been to create the ecosystem and build the ecosystem, around Asia, and which has been quite successful for us, because without that, I don't think we would have had the traction we have. And it also spends most of its time on capacity building for the social enterprises. So we actually have entities who come to us who are at all not investment ready. So we sort of start working with them from the get-go and see what needs to happen to get them to the IX side when they're investment ready. Now, I guess kind of relating all this for Australia, I think it'll be very interesting, and the reason, and I'm really grateful for Sandy for bringing me over, is for us to sort of see how can we link what's happening in Australia with rest of Asia. I think what I see is the fact that there is obviously a lot of passion, a lot of good intention, and a lot of good work that's happening in Australia, but I get the sense it's happening in a vacuum. And it'll be nice to see how we can link the work that's happening in Australia, be it with the social enterprises, be it the investors who are getting interested in this space, and really kind of get the two markets together, because there is a lot of potential if you work together to make this market grow even bigger. So so that's frankly my pitch. So I think the nice thing is we are doing it, and it is happening, and it'll be good not to sort of reinvent the wheel and just sort of learn from each other. So I'll stop there. Yeah?
So
okay.
any questions?